Avengers!
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Talking Smack, where we talk superheroes, movies, animation, and comics. I am your host, Josh Scar, and joining me this week is Matt. Matt, welcome back.
Yeah, glad to be here. How's it going?
It's going pretty good because we actually have another guest, as only the people on Apple Podcasts would know because the thumbnail looks a little different. We are joined by Dan from Casting Views. Dan, welcome to the show.
Hello, cheers for having me on.
So, Dan, tell us a little bit about Casting Views.
Casting Views, we are a general topic podcast. It's myself and my nephew Lou, and we generally sort of pick a really random topic each week, and it's usually a couple of days before recording. We were really well organised before, but now it's literally a couple of days. I'll call Lou up, say, what should we talk about? We'll suggest something. We try to have a laugh. We try to make people have a laugh. We try to also pick interesting topics. We stay away from anything too heavy. You know, everything from unusual ways people have made money to, at the moment, we're doing probably one of our heavier subjects being psychological experiments at the moment as we're recording this. So yeah, a little bit of everything.
The one that really stood out to me was it Unusual Robberies, I think? Is it where someone in Germany or Northern Europe stole a bridge overnight?
Yeah, yeah, it's unusual crimes. Yeah, and Lou picked one where a couple of people stole like a really long and really heavy steel bridge. Yeah.
The show is fantastic, and it is a lot of fun because it never sticks to just one thing. You guys don't pigeonhole yourself, so it is a lot of fun there. So this week, Dan is gracious enough to join us to talk about the 15-year anniversary of the Mass Effect franchise. This week, coming out, the original Mass Effect released November 2nd, 2007. And we're going to talk about the franchise as a whole, the original trilogy, Andromeda, everything in between that we know of. So we're going to get into that. But first, we're going to take a quick ad break from our friends Karen and Ann at Sugar Coated Murder. We'll be right back.
Hey, Ann Varner.
Hey, Karen Beatty.
We need a promo. You know, like where we talk about what we do on our podcast.
On our Sugar Coated Murder podcast, like how we love to bake and talk about murder.
That's what we need to talk about.
There you go.
I think we've talked about it. Y'all find us on all your favorite listening apps.
Stay sweet.
And don't murder.
Because if you kill people,
we will talk about you.
And we are back here with Josh, Matt, and Dan to talk about Mass Effect, the video game franchise, and celebrating 15 years of N7, which I'm sure, Matt, you hate the fan made holiday of N7 Day, because I know you're not the biggest fan of May the 4th as well.
Well, you're really putting me on the spot here. I just think May the 4th is kind of silly. I don't, hatred is maybe too strong of a word.
Did I say hate? I didn't. I was trying just to lean more into like it annoys you that
You said
fans
hate.
make such a big fans it bothers them that fans have made such a ridiculous holiday, especially when they try to stretch it out over like 7 days.
Yeah, it's not just May the 4th that becomes Revenge of the 5th, and it's like if you're gonna have a day, you get a day,
So let's talk Mass Effect. Dan, as the guest, we'll start with you. How were you introduced to this franchise?
Firstly, I want to say when you said I graciously joined you, I've been so excited about this because I love Mass Effect, so I've played it cool, I think. So thank you for having me on for this episode. Mass Effect, Mass Effect was the reason I got into console gaming. So I was happily going along on my PC sort of in the early 2000s. Then sort of towards around the 2006, 2007 mark, it was chugging along. I didn't really have the funds to kind of upgrade it. And so looking at consoles and I was kind of jealous that Mass Effect had come out on the consoles because I was a huge role playing RPG fan, so I loved Oblivion. I'd played that to death on the PC. Knights of the Old Republic, again, kind of loved those games. You know that meme with the boyfriend and with his girlfriend looking behind. It was kind of like that, looking over my shoulder at the consoles. So
walking along with your giant PC.
yeah, basically. And it was my partner. She actually convinced me. She said eventually, look, she goes, look, I'm fed up of you always searching for like the requirements on the back of the boxes in the shop. She goes, just get yourself a console. So yeah, so it was. I bought the
And
360.
that's
It
when
was
you
in.
immediately went and bought an engagement ring too, right?
Well, no, that's a different story altogether. But yeah, 2008. So I was a year late to the party with the game, but I got that along with it was GTA 4 and BioShock. 'Cause those were the three games, must-have games for me. I want it, but yeah, it was so Mass Effect was technically is kind of like one of the first games, and the reason for getting the 360 in the first place. Yeah.
Matt, how about you? How'd you get into Mass Effect?
Well, I'm sort of on the other end of the spectrum where I've always been, a console gamer at heart. Grew up with SNES, NES. I was a big Xbox kid, OG Xbox. So I had played the original Knights of the Old Republic and really enjoyed it, but I didn't really follow BioWare after that, and it was really just I think Mass Effect predates me working at GameStop, but I don't think it predates one of our friends from high school working at GameStop. And I think he was the one who was like, "Hey, you got to check this game out. It's looking really cool." And it's the guys that made KOTOR and KOTOR 2 and all that stuff. And I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll check it out." I think I probably recently gotten a 360, and the rest is history, I suppose.
My story is pretty much the same as you, Matt. Our friend who worked at what was EB Games at the time, you guys had played it, and I was like, "What the hell are you guys even talking about?" And you explained it to me. I think we went to EB right after that, and our friend bought a copy or not bought, but like grabbed a copy from behind the counter. Is like, "You're gonna play it," and it was already on the greatest hits. I know this was, I think it was like 2008 or 2009 because it was greatest hits. I remember really enjoying it, but I never had a lot of time to play it. And then my sister asked me to house sit for her. And so I brought my 360 and just plugged it into her TV and basically played 40 hours of Mass Effect while she was on vacation while I was supposed to be like house sitting for her. And it just blew me away. And I think that was one of the first games where I actually bought a strategy guide as well, because I wanted to make sure I was doing everything I could in that game and just making sure like there's one in the first Mass Effect where you have to find a rogue AI on the Citadel, but to solve the mission, you have to enter in a certain password. But like, how the hell are you supposed to know what the password is? It's like ABB XY ABB, and how are you supposed to know this? Besides trial and error and just continuing to reload the game.
Stop me if you're not finished, but it occurs to me, do we need to take a second and like explain what Mass Effect is? We kind of just rolled into it, which is great. But it occurs to me some people might not even know what we're talking about.
That is probably actually a good idea. So, Dan, would you like to do the honors? With the British accent, you guys are natural storytellers.
Yeah, so Mass Effect is well, there's a fourth part now, but ultimately it's a three-part. I do. I know it's a cliche, but it is almost like a space soap opera. It's about a universe, a galaxy of races, different alien races, pretty much at loggerheads with each other. That is something that would come up. In some of my discussion, a lot of the races just don't get along, and there's this looming threat of this ancient or this this race of aliens or creatures called the Reapers that come around every 50,000 years to wipe out, civilization or particular civilizations. And it's the battle of our hero, uh, Shepard, man Shep or Fem Shep, which will come later on to discuss how fans affectionately know them. But leading in each game pretty much a ragtag bunch of different characters into the battle against these Reapers. Um, but I do have to stress for me how much it is really that yes, there's this battle raging and this looming threat of these Reapers, but it is at its heart a story about relationships and yeah, betrayal and how people interact with each other.
For the time, I feel like it's also a pretty big deal in terms of like the whole pitch was that it's a choice-based game to some degree. It's a role-playing game where you're like going to these things, you're going on these missions, and occasionally you'll have you kill this person? Do you spare them? Do you make this decision? Do you make that decision? The idea was, the promise is that these choices will persist into the next game and then the game after that, which I feel like for me, and again, I was a console gamer, still am. So in terms of how this may have not been the case for PC gaming, I can't say, but it felt at the time very much like you're creating your own story, and it's a persistent story that you didn't really see that much. I feel like that was the first game that was really like, yeah, we're going to tell a story over multiple games, but also you're having an impact on it. And I think that, in retrospect, there are ways when we could see how some of the expectations going in like that third game maybe were at loggerheads with the actual reality of game development. But the idea is like, oh, you make this decision in the first game, and then possibly in the third game it comes back in some way, in some fashion, big or small. So I feel like that's also part of what makes it so cool, is you just didn't see anything like that before.
Yeah, and it did. I have to say, it's probably one of the very few games where I do think, or I did anyway, think about the decisions I was making, because it did feel like I was making a vital,
Yeah.
a vital choice. Um, as I said, I think for me, one of the things is it is a huge story, and yeah, I did go along for the ride, I have to say.
And it's also interesting to think about like how dense you're talking about these different races and the cultures that are at loggerheads. That your word, I keep, now it's in my head. I keep saying it, but how dense the sort of lore was that they wrote. Like there's an entire encyclopedia in each game. This is like also the period where any kind of big multimedia thing almost certainly came with like novels, movies, comics, all kinds of stuff, where it's like if you really want to, you could go for a time, you could go deep on this world, either within the game or without it.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I remember going into the bookstore and there you couldn't not see a Mass Effect novel or comic next to a Star Wars thing or any sci-fi shelf.
Yeah.
It was pretty impressive. I haven't actually read any of the Mass Effect comics or the novels just because I think Halo turned me off to any of those sort of extended lore ideas because it just seemed like such an undertaking and homework. I just want to enjoy the game.
Right. I picked up actually because I played through all the games when they came out and never really revisited them, even though I intended to. Because part of that is that replayability. You can go back again, you can try different things, you can do whatever. But I never really did until I think it was last year they released the Legendary Collection, where it was all three games in one, had all the DLC, most of it. Um, and I took that opportunity to just go straight through all these games again. And when I was like at the height of my Mass Effect mania again, I Dark Horse has this collection of like all the comics they published. So I bought it and just read them all in. I mean, they're okay. They're all right. But I did read them all.
With that, Mass Effect, we've been introduced to it. We have the original trilogy and then we have the spin-off of Andromeda. One of the big things with this series is that humanity is kind of new to this expanded culture in space, where they've just discovered the mass relays, which help them do like faster than light travel, so like time dilation is never really an issue. um and that's kind of where the game really picks up, is because the established races, species, kind of look down on humanity because humanity is supposed to be this big, like, reaching for the stars kind of species. I'm going to be saying that a lot, I'm sorry.
A
um
lot of species in the
the,
series.
they try to gain power quickly, which, I mean, humanity trying to gain power, no way.
Yeah.
So a lot of the other races look down on humanity because they think they're getting special treatment because they're trying to overreach, where other races have been in this essentially Starfleet kind of collaboration in the Citadel, which is the hub for all spacefaring societies. And humanity is just constantly trying to be like, hey, we deserve to be part of this. We're here now. We deserve to be part of this. And one of those things that they want to be a part of is this special force space cop called a Spectre, which basically they have no real um, no real guidelines for how they can act. They can investigate at their own impunity, and there's no real repercussions for them except getting their title stripped.
It's pretty much
which, oh
the
no.
most video game-esque thing in this world, where it's like,
Yeah.
oh, by the way, every single one of these guys is just the coolest badass that can do whatever they want, and also, guess what? You are one.
So yeah, the decision to make them is just exactly that. You're one now. Now you're not. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
So with that, there comes a story, as Dan was saying, of a big galactic reckoning coming, where the Reapers are coming to wipe out advanced societies because society can only reach a certain point, and if it exceeds that point, it's going to collapse in on itself and just destroy everything, essentially. Which, Matt, I don't know if you remember, that was actually not going to be the original ending, if I recall. There was going to be kind of a gray area where the Reapers are actually building an army to fight off like dark space, if I recall.
That I
There's like a
don't
big subplot with dark space that leaked, and they ended up rewriting it into the ending in Mass Effect 3 that we ended up getting.
that I do not recall, but I mean, I would not be surprised. I think, that's one of those things where I'm sure all kinds of this stuff, 3 games over what, like 5 or 6 years, maybe more. I think there's probably all kinds of stuff that got rewritten, repurposed like that.
Which feels then it would be odd because I think the story they have done with this looming threat which unites them all and and helps them all do this, it feels like it's the most natural. I mean, yeah, it's probably been played out in other sci-fi franchises, but I think they did it so well, so it would feel really odd now. I know it's easy to say in hindsight, but yeah, it feels like they did. If they stumbled upon it, they stumbled upon it probably the
Yeah,
better
right.
option there. Yeah.
Take this with a huge grain of salt, because I feel like our buddy who my buddy Matt's buddy, who got us into the game, I remember him telling us about how the ending had leaked, where dark space was a thing, and the original plan was to have advanced species essentially assimilate into a Reaper so that they can continue the fight against dark space, because dark space is contracting the universe, and the Reapers are the only thing keeping that contraction from happening at a faster pace.
I see.
Um,
Well,
so
and
it's supposed to be a little bit more of a
that is something that like factors into one of the ultimate endings in Mass Effect 3 is this idea that the compromise is like maybe there should be some merging of I don't know if we said the Reapers are like like an ancient mechanical species. They're like a superboard kind of, except instead of wanting to like assimilate people into their collective, they want to obliterate all organic life essentially, or like all
Organic
after a
life, yeah,
certain
yeah.
level, it's like they're, again, to bring it to Star Trek, it's like the reverse prime directive, where it's like, oh, you've gotten to this level of society, okay, you're out. And like somebody who's now currently in like a much lower process of development, they will be the guys who in 50,000 years will erase them when they become space people or whatever they are. So that, and there's like one of the endings of Mass Effect 3 is this idea that like, oh, maybe the answer is less one destroys the other, and it's more we merge together as sort of the singularity, kind of, basically.
yeah. Where have you guys seen other influences of Mass Effect in gaming or in multimedia in general?
I think as Matt was saying, I think the whole choice driven thing, I'm not going to say it's necessarily first, but I think that was really, I think, the one that really turned people onto that kind of that game. And also the whole Paragon Renegade Good Evil. So I think Knights of the Old Republic, to be fair, did do it beforehand, but I don't think that necessarily had the wider audience that Mass Effect did, sort of the wide appeal for that. So I think for me, I think that is really where the choices have consequences and choices carry over. I think that is, I think for me, it's probably kicked off from
Yeah,
that
and
series there.
it's interesting because I don't know, and maybe there's some example that's not springing to mind. I don't know necessarily that Mass Effect itself had a huge impact so much as like, I don't want to say it didn't have a huge impact, but I mean in terms of like a lot of the stuff it was doing was stuff that was like sort of in the water at the time, right? Like, you have BioShock coming out that also has that choice element where you can be the nice guy, you can be the most monstrous person in the world on the planet, or in the ocean in that case. Things like, the first game is a lot more it feels more in that KOTOR vein where it's more of an RPG. You're putting points in things. You're really working about like your equipment and your inventory and stuff. And then as the successive games come out, they become that element's sort of always there, but it becomes more action oriented, where it's taking more cues from like shooting games, which are also kind of is also kind of what's in the water gaming wise at the time. This is like the area where like the cover shooter is big, Gears of War, Resident Evil 4, stuff like that. So it's tough because it's one of those things where you can see all kinds of stuff that comes from it. I think there's a lot of like the narrative stuff that is probably this idea that the games can be like this big operatic thing. You can kind of see the influences on it and from it, right? Where it's like, I don't know, it's sort of almost emblematic of where the gaming industry was at for those, I don't know, however many years between Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect Andromeda.
And I'm also can't remember at the time, but obviously the whole relationship, as in romance relationship, that was quite big in the game, and I think that felt unusual because yeah, okay, Fable, you could marry one of the characters, and obviously you got the Sims, but they all felt very. It is a task you
Yeah,
just.
none of them were characters.
Yeah, yeah, and it felt like the actual relationship element of this game, and it carries through all three, felt far stronger than I think I'd seen in other games.
The romance options, one having multiple romance options with characters that actually impact the story so heavily, or can impact them, that is something that was really interesting. And then again, the idea that you can save one or the other and the game continues. Like usually it's never, in most video games it's a lot more simple where it's like you either save the person or you finish the mission and there's something with that. But the idea of the ripple effect of like, oh, you're gonna save Ashley and kill Caden or vice versa, and then just little things like in the first Mass Effect, if you don't find Rex's armor, he ends up dying at the end, towards the end of the game, and then Rex is gone for the next two games, and it's a really fun and interesting ripple effect because it encourages you to go out into the galaxy and see the world as they've created it, and not just go, okay, this is the main mission line, I don't care about anything else, let's get this over with.
Yeah, like I think that if you are just playing those games straight through where you're going story mission to story mission, I don't want to say that it is a bad game, but I think that's not like the stuff that is the best about it, right? Like if we're thinking about the impact that it's had, I really do think, and again, like you said, Daniel, other games have done this before, but I don't know that at the maybe it's the scale or but a big AAA game where so much of the game is you're going back to your base or your ship and you're like spending time. Oh, I've got 8 crew members. Next 45 minutes are me just talking to them, and maybe there's the option to flirt with one. Maybe there's an option to like tell them to fuck off or whatever. Like all kinds of like and
Yeah,
learning about
yeah.
their backstories and stuff. I think is maybe the character work, the storytelling that's sort of encouraging you to do things that are not just go to this warehouse and shoot the guys until the cutscene says to go to the next warehouse, right? Is kind of like
Yeah.
that's where the meat of the game is, I think, for so many people, and why it resonates so well, because it's like, you are building your character, and part of the way you're doing that is the relationships with these characters and the choices you're making and talking to them.
And if especially the second game, if you don't go talk to the characters, I think Josh, as you were saying, you're going to miss out probably a good 25% of the game because you won't get the missions
Yeah, and that's
that
and
come
yeah,
from that.
and if you haven't played it, that second game is based on like, you're recruited for this big suicide mission, and part of the game is like recruiting all your teammates, and then at the end of the game, you do the suicide mission, and you have, there's all these numbers in the background that are kind of judging how well you're going to do, how many people you're going to lose, and like over the course of the game, you have all these opportunities where it's like, oh, so and so says I need to go take care of like this thing with my dad, or I'm never going to be able to like get over it. And if you didn't do that, odds are that character's going
Yeah.
to die because like you didn't take the time to like go and do technically.
Which is fine, Jacob sucks.
Let's not do that. Uh, you know, it's technically optional, but it's also not optional. If you're trying to get this, it's sort of an interesting way. The thing I was just talking about, where it like kind of mechanicalizes that sort of relationship building, where it builds into the events of the game. It's not just, oh, my side quest to get my armor or whatever. It's I'm going to resolve my issues, and also that means I'm going to be better for you in the end of the game and change the ending and then the next game depending on it.
And yeah, the second game I would say is pretty much 95%
Yep.
building up a friendship and then 5%
Yeah, right.
defeating the final boss, right? And that's the thing, yeah, for like people who aren't familiar. Yeah, you get your characters, you recruit them, and then there's the loyalty mission. And if you think about it, it does make sense because you want them to be loyal to you to go in because you that the end mission is called the suicide mission. So it's like, yeah, you want them to
Yeah.
be on your side, right?
Which those loyalty missions, even though you do have to run through most of them, if not all of them, to progress the game, but you can still just kind of have the character, your shepherd, tell the guy to just fuck off essentially. Because, like, speaking of the Jacob mission where you go find his dad, who essentially is running a Lord of the Flies situation, you can either like have Jacob kill him, or you can kill him yourself, or you can be like, hey, we're going to bring you in because you've just performed an atrocious act against humanity. You're gonna stand trial, but then he'll eventually kill himself anyway. And depending on how you act in that and in the aftermath, Jacob could become loyal to you, and maybe he'll survive the final mission, or he can not. He can just be like, "Oh, Shepard, you suck. I hate you," and he'll definitely die in that case.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing too, where you have these loyalty missions and are like, this is their story wrapping up, but also you have usually there's some kind of decision near the end of the thing that is like, okay, they actually going to become loyal, or are you going to like? It's sort of like it's sort of like the Paragon Renegade system in Microcosm, where it's like, are you going to nuke the planet or are you going to pet a puppy? Where this one is like, are you going to like save this guy's life? Or are you going to tell him to kill himself? Like that's going to decide how he feels about you. But um, yeah, so that it all gets back to those things where it's like you're just making choices, and it's really about building the character as you see them in your head. Even if like even if at the end of that Jacob mission, no matter what you do, his dad ends up dead because that's the outcome that they
That's
went
really,
for. It
yeah.
doesn't matter because it's about okay, that's who my shepherd is, and that's his relationship with Jacob in this case, or Liara, or Rex, or whoever.
While we're on the subject of the crew members and loyalty missions, is there anyone throughout the franchise that you guys are just like, nope, not bringing them on board my ship? Nope, not. I don't want them to be part of my team. Anyone like that for you guys, or are you guys a little more balanced?
Well, I can answer this question with a long-winded story, as is my way. Not a story about Mass Effect, but about Knights of the Old Republic. When I played Knights of the Old Republic, and I was just doing my thing. I'm a dumb little kid. I think it came out when we were in high school. And then I got to the end of the game, and I realized I missed the mission where you get, what is it, HK-47?
Yeah.
So I like most of the game without like the best character in the game, essentially. And I went, oh shit. Because of that like formative moment for me as a true gamer, the answer is no. Everybody comes on the ship, no matter how shitty they are, because what if I miss them? What if they're actually cool?
I think for me, I think Josh, I think we've had a couple of chats through Twitter, but um, in definitely for me in the first game, Caden doesn't make the cut. I feel bad for him. He doesn't do anything to offend me directly, but it's just he doesn't make the cut. I think I have alternated in the past, and when we talk about our playthroughs, I'll probably mention why. But um, I think Ashley, while she's not necessarily the nicest of characters, I think there's some interesting wrinkles to kind of like the relationship you can have with Shepard as the game goes on. And I've actually kind of recently done a playthrough. I'm currently on the third one at the moment, and it really comes to the fore there. Um, the only other character, but I think it's they just don't do enough with him. Is I think Zaid in
Oh
the
yeah.
second game. He just feels he was a DLC character if I remember correctly, and he's just angry man who's there. He's just Mr. Angry. That's all he is, and yeah, it just feels like there's a lot of backstory to him, but
Yeah.
you don't see it, and you actually deny him his revenge. You let like Garrus and everyone else have their revenge and their missions, but you tell him he can't have his if you want
Yeah.
him loyal. So yeah, Zaid
Yeah,
and
Zaid's
Caden for me.
interesting also because that's another thing that's like about how it's reflecting where the games are at the time. he is a DLC character that you got, but only if you bought the game brand new, because that was when EA was like, we're gonna sweeten the pot so you don't buy it used, and if you buy it used, you have to like pay extra to get stuff. So like you can see maybe they were just like, oh well, we don't have time to like flesh this guy out because he's just going to be a throwaway DLC character.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. He's like a really, he's not a good guy. He's a very interesting. But I made this decision in 2007 between Ashley and Caden. But for me, again, as a dumb little, I guess I wasn't in high school anymore, but as a dumb little shithead, I was like, oh, she's racist, but she's also the pretty lady that maybe I'm trying to romance. So dumbass me was like, yeah, I'll get rid of the piece of white bread in favor of the alien bigot.
Yeah, Caden always gets killed for me. Sorry to my friend Sarah if you're listening. I know you love Caden, but he's just so boring. I just cannot and will not talk to him if I don't have to.
It really is an interesting trick that first game does, where it's like, here, we're going to start you out. You're going to, this whole big cast of interesting alien characters. We're going to start you out with two of the worst characters in the game. And they're like two different reasons.
Yeah, that's
One
so true.
is just horrible alien supremacist, or human supremacist, rather. The other one is he might as well just be a loaf of bread.
Yep. And then Zaid, Zaid is one that I never cared about because as a DLC character, he really has no impact on the end of the game anyway. Whereas if you lose Tally or Legion, then there is a big impact at the end of the second game as well as an impact into the third game because stories will progress differently and maybe you won't have success in some areas. But yeah, Zaid is probably one of the more one-dimensional characters in the entire franchise.
Yeah, and some of these characters, we should note that, like, you have characters that you'll meet in the first game and will show up in major roles throughout all three games. Like, I think Tally is a crew member in all three games, as opposed to, like you say, like, Liara is not, she's a major character, but she's not a teammate in that second game. Zaid is maybe not a teammate in any of the games if you bought it used or whatever. So it's interesting, like, how some of these characters are emphasized and not, and how their absence makes a bigger deal than others might be. Just a long-winded way of saying what you just said.
Yeah, and that actually, that's something that I found really interesting when they were releasing Mass Effect 2. They had released like a quick, like interactive comic that you could download as a DLC, free DLC on your system, where you basically got to make all the big choices throughout the game and you get the story of the first game without having to play it. Or if you just wanted to boot up the game, you can make the choices right then and there. So like, what did you do with the Citadel? I blew it up. What did you do with Caden?
I think originally it did not come out on the PS3. So like
Correct.
When Mass Effect 2 comes out on the PS3, they're like, we have to find someone to shore it up for those people that didn't buy an Xbox or whatever.
Yeah, but which again, I thought it was a cool way of getting people involved and understanding the choice-based dynamic of the game.
Yeah.
So there is a bastard child in this franchise. Not that I think it should be considered as such, but the internet does not care for it. Which, I mean, it made for some great memes and glitch videos. But overall, like, what was either of your experiences with Mass Effect Andromeda?
I'm going to admit, I've only played it once. Now, that's not because I didn't like it. It's just because of time, generally. But I went to it probably 6 or 7 months after it was released. And I remember having a good time with it. I don't think I was as taken with it as the first three. But I think it suffers from the first three games are so great. There's a whole world build up that we haven't even mentioned, kind of like the Normandy, the ship feels like a character in itself as well. And so you're trying to create a spin-off in a new world, and I think people just wanted probably more of the same. But I remember that the gameplay felt really good. I kind of went along with the story. I remember sort of having that, oh, let's just do the one more mission. And I didn't think it was as bad as I was expecting it to be when I got to it.
Yeah,
sure.
It's interesting. I mostly agree fully. Like I played it and I was like, this is good. I think story-wise, it's probably not as good as, like you said, the previous games. But it's interesting how much the internet hates it, because I feel like there are like a few things that really hold it back and like just have sort of crystallized in the minds of like the internet at large. Like, first of all, I think there were I think has come out since then, there were some genuine development issues that like caused some bumpiness. But also like, the game ships with this all kinds of bugs. So what happens is like they send it to streamers, reviewers, influencers, whatever, who then make a bunch of videos about, look at how crazy it is when I walk through a door and I go flying across the room or whatever the hell,
Yeah.
which is all fixed by like a day one patch, right? So like before the game's even out, you have this thing where people are like, oh God, it's such a broken mess. Why would I play it? But also like, this is 2017, right? We're just a few years after Gamergate. So like immediately, as soon as it's being marketed, you have this like vocal set of people who are like, they destroyed the game because such and such lady isn't hot enough or whatever. Like, I can't believe it's going so woke, even though that wasn't the term they would use then. So it's like, it's such an interesting kind of case where you have all these like weird things that get thrown in the pot that make, I think, people just hate it before they even really played it. On top of like, I think unrealistic expectations about like, this game means so much to me. It told this big story over 3 games, and now it's telling a story that's maybe not as good, but maybe is setting up some stuff. And I think people will just like, it was the first Mass Effect game. All of the previous 3 games were on the Xbox 360 and PS3. This was Xbox One and PS4. So I think a lot of people just had this sense of like what a next gen Mass Effect game would be that were like not realistic. But I think like ultimately it's a fine game. A lot of it is like a natural evolution from like where Mass Effect 3 ends up. Like if you play Dragon Age Inquisition, which is in a similar position for BioWare's other series, Dragon Age, they feel like they're very similar, on like a very similar trajectory, right? Where like they don't feel that different to play, I don't think, but one is praised and one is like, because of all kinds of reasons, it's the worst game I've ever played. What a joke. Worst game of 2017.
Yeah, I only ever really encountered 2 glitches in the game. One was a weird, like one of the weird dinosaur guys ended up just like floating in the air, and like it didn't affect the game at all. Like I could shoot it, it couldn't hurt me, but it was just stuck in the air, which I have a picture of that on my socials somewhere. And then my writer character took a drink out of her ear. She like literally just turned her head and just poured it down her ear gullet. But other than that, the game played fine. I played it on my PS4 and I enjoyed it. I think the story did hurt a little bit because it is more about like colonization and settling than it is about a bigger threat, really, until you get towards the latter half of the game. And like the final mission of the game, it feels like you're finally getting set up for something bigger, and then it's like game's over, maybe DLC.
Well, you can tell that they really are trying to set themselves up for another series, right? Where like, they're trying to separate themselves from the main series story-wise, so they don't have to deal with like what ending did you choose, what characters were alive, all that stuff.
Yeah, which the game takes place in between Mass Effect 2 and 3, essentially. Like these ships leave Earth and the Milky Way solar system in the middle of Mass Effect 2 and 3, just in case Commander Shepard is right and the Reapers are coming to wipe out humanity and all sentient species. So they all send their own little arcs to the Andromeda galaxy, and they're going to just establish new setups. So it's taking place in between 2 and 3, but also like 50,000 years into the future,
Like all the
because it takes that long to get there.
The last thing the characters remember is like Mass Effect 1, and they depart then, but then for that,
Yeah.
they've been in stasis for centuries. So it's like it's setting up this new status quo for these characters. It's setting up new characters and like setting up a new threat. So it's doing all kinds of things where you can tell they are hoping for more games or DLC, but they just don't get there because the game was so unfairly maligned. Where, is it like a blockbuster? I don't think so, but it doesn't deserve near as much hate as it got. Like you can go, like I said, you can go back to video, like YouTubers in the beginning of 2018, like claiming it was the worst game of 2017, and it is categorically not. It is fine at worst.
And that's the thing, and that's what found really curious, right? I just wondered if the critics jumped on that as the sole reason to want to hate the game because it's not Mass Effect 4. Because when Skyrim comes out, we all laughed at that, or the press all laughed at that. Oh, look, it's
Yeah.
another buggy game, but it's fine. It's just Bethesda. And then Red Dead Redemption, I think, had a whole heap of bugs, but again, it's fine. It's an open world game. You can forgive that. I've even got the Witcher in the Game of the Year edition, Witcher 3, is it? So many bugs in that, but but it's fine again, and it just seemed to be Andromeda just seemed to be that bait for everyone's hate when it came out. It's amazing.
Yeah, and everyone, like I was saying, everyone kind of overlooks how quickly they fixed it.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just most of the people that played it were not the people that got review copies in advance of the release.
yeah,
And I'm of the opinion that if it is not a bug that like destroys, like makes the game harder for you to enjoy, or like ruins your save file or whatever. Like if you're just walking around and then a character becomes like a weird monster man, that's funny. Like that's
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Maybe you don't want bugs, but like when stuff like that happens, it's kind of like a gift.
I do wonder if people were still hurt from the whole ending, whether you fall on the side of yeah, the Fiore there was justified or not. I think because that was the end note of the original trilogy, and then the next one comes out a buggy mess, to quote probably the press at the time. I just wondered if it bled into that.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case because yeah, people left Mass Effect 3 even before they did the extended edition ending, and I think people went in hoping that they could hate more on Mass Effect Andromeda because it got them their clicks and it got them all their attention.
Yeah. And then, just to summarize it quick, if anyone's listening to this and not familiar, this idea of Mass Effect as a game that is funneling your choices into the next game and the next game, the third game ends with sort of like, the derisive way to put it is that you're choosing between like three colors, three options, three doors that, so a lot of people felt really frustrated, I think, that it wasn't that the final choice, that the ending did not take in like the full breadth of all what those choices mean for you, which like I understand, but also I think if people really thought about it, they would realize that that is literally impossible for at
Yeah,
least for like
yeah.
the Xbox 360 PS3 hardware and like the man hours it would take to factor in all that for development.
We
But
don't even
it
have
became
games like that now. We don't really have
yeah,
games that
right.
that's the thing.
Yeah, where it's like I can't believe that it didn't take my, one in a million choice in
Yeah.
consideration when it was like uh doing my final cutscene animation or whatever. Where so I think, for better or worse, it kind of soured some people on Mass Effect 3, if not the entire series. So I think there's probably something to that where some people were coming in like, I was already sort of pissed at Mass Effect, and then this game comes out and it's not, you know, curing
Yeah, I
cancer or
for
whatever.
me, I didn't hate the original ending even, and then after they released the extended edition patch, I still didn't hate the idea of it. I understand what they're going for. What I really felt disappointed by was the fact that I had saved the Rachni, I had rebuilt the Krogan, I had done all this stuff, and when it came down to it and we were in the final mission, I never got to see any of that. A lot of the final battle, the final bef- away from Shepard, all that last ditch effort to save the universe happens through a comm link,
Yeah,
and you're just hearing people like Shepard, this is happening. Shepard, this is happening. And I would have appreciated like one little cutscene where an Avengers Assemble kind of cutscene where you have the Rachni show up, you have them fighting alongside the Krogan, and I think that's something that you could have programmed in. Like you could have put something in there where you have the cutscene where everything happens, and then you just have the data points pull for how the decisions were made. So, like if you killed the Rachni in the first game, no Rachni in the final fight. It just they do enough that you can have that, and I think that it's not too technically heavy. And if they could have even just programmed that cutscene of where you just see everyone assembled for that battle, that's all I needed. I didn't need it to have an impact on my final three choices. I would have just liked to have seen everything come together in that moment.
yeah. I don't know how game development enough to know to like dispute you or agree with you, like whether or not that is feasible. It would depend on how technical someone wanted it to be, where it's like, how do you factor in for someone who did save the Rachni but didn't recruit the Krogan versus someone who didn't and then did or didn't do either, where you sort of like, I think there is a point, depending on what this cutscene theoretically might be, where like the variables become so much that it's like we would have to factor in so much that even just doing that quick cutscene could theoretically become overburdening for the team, for the machinery, for whatever. But that's again a thing where I know nothing about the technical aspects of game development. I barely know anything about any aspects of game development. So I'm only just kind of guessing at like what little I know.
And I think actually between the three of us, the two things I think has made me realise is one, I don't think necessarily people hated the ending. I think Josh, you kind of said what I was literally thinking at the time. That I think we were so invested in the story that the ending let us down rather than it being a bad ending. And I think it would be,
Yeah.
to use your analogy, imagine, you're watching Endgame and the battle's about to start, and then it cuts and you get some still images, and this is what happened in the battle, and this is what
Yeah.
happened in the battle, and this is how they won, and this is what happened after. You didn't see it happen. And I
Yeah.
think it's taking that away. But yeah, I guess Matt, as you're saying that, they probably fall down on the programming side of things, and it's like, well, let's get that extra sort of audio in there rather than an extra cutscene.
And I think even the last sequence where like, if I'm remembering right, it's been at least a year since I played Mass Effect 3 now, you're making the final push, and then no matter what happens, like the broad strokes are the same, right? Where it like, probably for technical reasons, it is funneling you into this one situation because like where basically Shepard gets his shit wrecked and then he has to make the final choice while he's dying, basically. Not necessarily dying. There's an ending where he can survive, or they can survive, she can survive. But that's sort of like the thing where there's all kinds of story variables throughout, like at the weight of these three games, and then ultimately what they do is they winnow all of it down to just, here you are, make a choice. And I would guess that some of that is because trying to factor in even a fraction of that is probably like mind-boggling.
I've actually got my take on the ending would be is, and I, again, I don't know how it would work for scripting for the actual end result of the game, but it needed to finish about 10 minutes beforehand. There's a scene where Shepard and Anderson are slumped. I think they've seen off the elusive man. And there's quite an emotional bit where Anderson's saying, I'm proud of you, son, you've done it. And it's almost like and they're looking out into into space. If it had ended there, I think for me, perfect ending, emotional.
Sure.
Then you
Yeah.
could do a little recap of what happened, but that for me would have been the perfect ending.
Is that before the little ghost boy shows up? Before
Yeah,
the actual choice? Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
that's Anderson's goodbye essentially.
Yeah.
yeah. And then you kind of wake up, and then you're taken, by the little ghost boy, to the three doors. Yeah,
Yeah, and I do think like just making it more, not quite a binary choice, but I think there's three choices, so literally not a binary choice, but basically funneling it down into those is something that frustrated people, where it's like, oh, I did all this for these three games, and it boils down to A, B, or C. And for better or worse, that's about expectations, right? Where like you have this idea of what it's going to be in your head, and then you get there and it's not that, so you get pissed. Or
maybe you
some
could
people.
And
have what Josh, sorry, what you were saying, have it almost like it's a wonderful life ending where Shepard does die, and the little ghost boy takes him and said, "Look what you've done,"
Yeah,
and
right.
you show.
and let's not forget also with Mass Effect 3, I don't want to turn this into like a this is how Mass Effect 3 sucks, because I don't think it sucks. I
No,
enjoyed
no.
the trilogy immensely. But like when Mass Effect 3 first came out, they were also implementing an online feature where if you played online with friends, you basically built up your in-story arsenal so that you were more well prepared to attack the Reapers. The multiplayer was fun in my opinion. I thought the 4-player horde mode task based assignments was fun, and it was a great way to get you familiar with enemies and increasing difficulty levels. And I put a lot of time into that.
Yep.
That was a lot of fun. But again, like you're putting time into this multiplayer mode that essentially means nothing at the end of the game. they tell you that it does, but it kind of doesn't.
Well, it doesn't, because one of the things I researched a little bit while I was replaying the series, that galactic readiness score determines how good of an ending you get, basically. Like, the endings all kind of are the same, but especially with there's an ending where, like, the Geth survive and Shepard survives, and all of that is some weird calculation based on the side quests you do, the loyalty missions you've done, divided by, like, your score in multiplayer or whatever. So, like, it does, and I think it's kind of a sharp way to implement multiplayer at a time when, like, all games, that was the thing where, like, because of Call of Duty, every franchise was like, we got to have a multiplayer element for better or worse. So it's like, it is an interesting kind of footnote, because, like, that doesn't really happen anymore, and even when it does, you never see it influencing the single player mode like this. You're right, but also there is some impact. So it's not like just straight up lying to you, you know what I mean?
Mhm. So I've got a few other questions here, unless you guys want to keep kind of talking about other things. But did you prefer to do the Paragon role or the Renegade role throughout the 4 games?
I did both. The original games, I would play through as a. It was always it's weird how it felt. It was a male paragon, and then I would play through straight after as a female renegade. Just to
I
experience
would
both.
do the exact opposite, actually. I do female Paragon, male Renegade.
I think I'm one of those people who, in games, where most of the time, if it's giving me the option, I'm going to be nice.
Absolutely.
Both times I've played through the trilogy, I have been mostly Paragon, although there are probably some of, like, the more interesting Renegade choices I made. Like, sometimes when you're in a conversation with someone, the prompt will pop up, and it's, if you go for it, Shepard will punch someone in the face or whatever, pull a gun on them. Or sometimes I might have done that, but overall, I'm a good boy.
Yeah, I'd say the last few times I've played it, I always think I'm going to do a renegade run through. I can't. And then, in
I
fact,
always say,
if, yeah, if I come out of a conversation and it says I've picked up some renegade points, I'm like, why? What did I do? Who did I upset?
well, especially in the second game, where it's like, oh, by the way, if you're an evil bastard, you're going to become a scarred monster. Like, no, thank you.
Which I think through one of the DLCs, you actually can upgrade your med bay and you can clear all that up
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. I now have to say, I was going to say, I now have to play as a male paragon. And the reason why I say I have to is my partner now, since we moved house a little while ago, sort of we've got like I don't have my own room to game in, so it's like I come and do the TV, and it's amazing, right? What I say, why I always think it's a great game, because I've played it, I know it inside out, is when I'm playing it, she'll be doing something, and then she'll start watching it, and she'll actually sit down and watch me play it because she gets so caught up in the story. But now, because the one time she saw me play it a few years ago, it was as male Paragon, I have to do that because that's her ship now as well. So I have to keep doing it like that.
I actually tried playing with Ricky not that long ago. I think when the Legendary Edition came out, I'm like, I've played this series so many times. How about you make the choices and see what happens? And she just got like paralyzed with fear because she's like, I can't make those choices. I'm like, I'm playing the game. I'm the one that is going to have to deal with the ramifications. You just make the choice. She's like, no, too much responsibility. Nope. I'll go take care of the kids. You make the choices in the game.
Yeah, you do the serious stuff, Josh. For as much as it's based on choice, it is very much in vogue of the time, where the options are be the most peaceful person in the world, or be the most evil bastard in the world. Like,
Yeah.
Fallout 3 comes out, and it's like, oh, do you want to nuke this town for no reason, or do you not want to do that? Like, those
I
are
mean,
the kind of options, morality options, that games were working with at the time.
the funny thing is, though, there are still some. It's weird, even if you are playing it as like the good person, the paragon. There are some weird things, anomalies that crop up. Like I love in the second game where you record the message for the shop owners. So you're going into each one and you're saying, tell you what, give me a discount or else,
Right.
and so you record that message. I'm Commander Chef, and this is my favorite shop in the Citadel. So all the shops are playing that. And it's like,
Yep.
how have a conscience, mate. You're supposed to be a paragon. And,
Yeah.
Got to save those credits where you can.
and there's another mission where you're going into like um the like the built up area where the virus is going around on Omega, I think.
Yep.
And you go into a room and there's two looters and they're looting a dead person. You give them a lecture, And so you then send them off, and then there's a wall safe on the wall. You go empty that, in the same, and you pick up the credits from there, and it's just the weird little things that creep up like that.
Yeah, that sort of cognitive.
And those little things don't affect your Paragon or
No,
Renegade meter either.
it's like when you're in any.
I told them off. That's all that really matters.
Ludonarrative dissonance, I think they call that.
So do you guys have a favorite crew member? I know a lot of people love Garrus. I never actually understood the love for Garrus. He was I always played as a soldier, so I never really needed Garrus, which I know the soldier profile is kind of the milk toast. It's the Caden Alenko of the classes that you can play as. I always prefer shooting because I don't know, the essentially mage classes just never really, I never got the hang of it, at least through Mass Effect 1. In Mass Effect 2 and 3, I think they refined it really well.
For me, I think the Garrus thing, I look at it a lot of the times. I look at it, as I say, through my partner's eyes. I think the love for Garrus, because she picks Garrus and Rex, and I think it's because they are. I think the relationship with the Shepard character can be quite good. As in friends, they like, especially with Garrus, it feels like they've been through the same kind of stuff that, and they can back each other up. It feels like that's why that's there. Um, for me, God, I want to choose two or three. I actually like, if we pick the main crew, I really like Mordin. I think he's
Yeah,
got a fascinating story. Created the genophage for the Krogans, which very quickly for people, it's like the Krogans were basically a race built for war, and yeah, they invented this disease to kind of make them infertile, wasn't it? To
Neuter
stop,
them.
yeah. Um,
yeah,
and so he then realizes his mistake and is trying to, create the cure. Then he's trying to reverse that. Um, and yeah, and I've literally just played it last night. There's the heartbreaking line where just he kind of says, "Oh, what are you going to do after this, Morden?" He goes, "I don't know. I'll have a sort of bet. It might retire to the seaside and investigate seashells." And I think, and then we know what happens to him. Um, so I think Morden's interesting, but also Javik in Mass Effect 3, which
yeah, yeah.
weirdly he was DLC as well. If you think about it,
Yep.
originally, so a lot of people wouldn't have ever
And
played
that was
him.
another one that people were pissed about because he does kind of have a significant role if you actually get that DLC.
Yeah, he was
Absolutely,
another one that was like packed in with the game. It's like if that's them being like, if you bought it new, you'd have this really
yeah.
important story thing.
But and his importance is that he's one of the Protheans, who was the original race who was wiped out, sort of 50,000 years earlier. But yeah, like you said, Josh, if you've got him and you bring him along, there's a lot of interesting things he kind of says. Um, but yeah, I'd have to say between Mordin and Jarek, and if I could have a third, um, again a random choice though, I think is Kasumi. Because
Yeah, she's
I like Kasumi a lot.
yeah, while she's not fleshed out, I love her side mission. It's more like you feel like you're a James Bond in that. You've got to infiltrate that party and find this and that. And her story isn't just, oh, I hate these people. These people killed some of my people. It's almost like a love story. You're helping her get over that grief by picking up that grey box or whatever of her ex lover. And so
Yeah, Grey Box.
yeah, and she just comes across as if that felt like a character that could have had a lot of the background mind. I think it's
yeah, and Kasumi is one of those characters who like she's DLC, but she was one of the ones who was like, okay, now you have to pay for it, no matter how you
yeah,
bought the game. So I only played that whole storyline for the first time last year when I was going through. I think she shows up in 2, right?
mm,
Um,
Mhm.
and it was just such a fun little mission because it's like you're just in a space and you're trying to like figure out who your target is or whatever. So like you said, James Bond is on point where it's like you're mingling, you're searching this area without trying to seem like you're standing out too much. It's really fun.
yeah,
Yeah, and she's got a little bit of like a black cat kind of feel to her as well, where she's really flirty, but you don't know if she's got ulterior motives. So yeah, there's a little
Yeah, like
intrigue
the
with
Master
her as
Chief.
well.
Yeah,
mm,
Yeah, for me, I think my favorite crew member, I feel like has to be either Liara or Grunt. Actually,
okay,
I don't know. I like Grunt because he's a pure Krogan, and he's also voiced by Steve Bloom. So like there's just I enjoy Steve Bloom a lot, and his performance is just a lot of fun. And what he brings once you get Rex into Mass Effect 2, it like he's going through puberty, and so you have to go through this
Yeah.
giant battle, is a lot of fun. And I think that while he's a very one note character, helping him learn who he is and like understanding the Krogan better through him was really interesting.
Yeah, it's so hard to choose. To your original point, Josh, I like Garrus just because I think Daniel alluded to this a little bit, where he's just seems like a good bro. Like, yeah, him, like his role is, and this is sort of exemplified in his like one of his final scenes, not final scenes, but one of his big scenes in Mass Effect 3 is just Shepard and Garrus hanging out. So like he is, he's a cool looking guy. He's kind of a slick, charming dude who's your best bro, which is kind of just a kind of a cool character. Although when I played it last year, I did note how much of a cop he is. Like he is just such a cop.
Speaking of the last moments that you really get to spend with Garrus, do you let him win the shootout competition?
No, I'm the hero.
It's weird how that is a difficult decision though. Sometimes I'm like, do I let him win or not?
Yeah, right.
Do I let my friend win because we might not see each other tomorrow, or do I show him how good I am?
I don't want him
and
to
tell
have
him
too much confidence. He goes into that knowing how good he has to be. But both times I've played through the trilogy, like overall, I romanced Liara. And even though this second time in the Legendary Edition, I was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try some other options. And then just, well, I the heart wants, the heart wants, So, I
I'm
don't
the
know that
same. Sorry, I was
yeah,
just going to say I'm the same, and I think that's because she is again another well-rounded, well-written character. I think.
yeah,
I think they.
Liara for life.
Yeah.
Like you were talking about, Daniel, there's so many. Like Morden is great. He is a weird eugenicist, but he's a weird eugenicist with a heart of gold.
Yeah. Even Jack, I was toying with the idea of Jack, and because if you think about it, that's quite a dark storyline for her as well.
Yeah, she's a character who was like tormented and like experimented on to
Yeah.
like give her powers or test her powers or whatever. But
She wants
yeah,
she wants to live in the basement ultimately of the ship as well. And
yeah,
then the turnaround to the third game, where she's then a teacher at the school
yeah.
for the gifted kids. And I think that's again, it goes back to what we're saying. You just wish there was more. Obviously, I know that it's physically you can't, but there's a real good story in that character.
I think Miranda's very cool in Mass Effect 2 and to a lesser extent 3, even though like, she is definitely there. And this game comes out in 2010. She's like the character that's like, hey, here's the hot lady,
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we patched it out here, there's a bunch of butt shots whenever you talk to her,
Yeah.
But she's like also like an interesting character in her own right. Don't make me choose. I can't choose.
Fair enough. Your answer is Joker then. Okay.
Actually, he sucks though. Like I played last year and I was like, Joker sucks, man. Sometimes you just gotta fly the ship, dude.
All right. Do you guys have a least
Ashley.
favorite crew member? For me, it's Caden. Like Caden for me is the worst. Like Ashley, yeah, she's a space racist, but she's compelling in her racism, I guess. Whereas Caden's
That's gonna
just,
make a really good soundbite.
like
when
we
I
said,
clip it
a
out.
loaf of bread.
She's compelling in her racism.
I've already got one from each game. It'll be Caden in the first. I think it'll be Jacob in the second, and I'm not a huge fan of Vega in the third. Yeah, so
I don't think anyone's really a big fan of Vega.
Well, it's interesting because those are all kind of the same kind of flavor of character, right? Where they're all supposed to be like the normal guy, the regular human. And I think of all of them, Jacob is probably like the best of them, just because like he's he's a normal guy. He's kind of boring, but like he's kind of charming in his way. And then you have like Vega who shows up and he's like, "Yo, bro, chacho, I'm going to do some push-ups or whatever." But yeah, so I think I would agree with that. The human guy is the worst.
Yeah, I was gonna say special mention for me for I think it's in the second game, the chef on the Normandy. I mean, you're trying to stop the Reapers, and he wants you to buy potatoes and onions to.
Hey, that could make or break your galactic readiness score. You never
Ab
know.
absolutely.
All right. Well, that's all I have for talking points. Do you guys have anything else that you wanted to discuss?
Do you have an
I could
order of
probably
games? Do you have an order of preference for the games?
I would say 2, 1, 3.
Yeah, that's what I've got. Yeah.
I think that's probably me too, although I think it might, I think 1 and 3 might change places depending on like what I'm considering, because I think 1 is more of that old school CRPG, which is great, but sometimes when if depending on my mood, the more action oriented cinematic stuff of 3 might feel better, but I think 2 overall is still the best one. I feel like it's a cliche to say it, but it's partially because it's the Empire Strikes Back of the set, right? Where it's just about raising the stakes and it doesn't have to come down from the stakes because they're setting up for another one.
I just want to say, Josh, again, thanks for having me on to this. I just wish people could say, look, just go play them if you haven't, because you can't distill this down into an hour. I mean, there are
Yeah,
so
right.
many
Yeah,
memorable
hours.
missions. Yeah, I mean, we haven't even mentioned the random things that can happen. Like, is it Conrad Werner, who's a random side character you don't even have to interact
Yeah,
with?
that stupid piece of shit.
Yeah, but if you do, he then features.
When I played it last year, when I first played it, I did everything with that guy. And then when I played it last year, I talked to him once. And then I realized midway through the second game, I was like, wait a second, I haven't seen him in a while. What did I miss?
Yeah. But there are so many things that stick out, and like the last thing I'll say before I will then shut up is like again I think it's in the second one. It's the Is it the guy whose brother? I assume he's got, is it autism or something? But he's like a super genius, and his brother has then got him tied up in this machine with all tubes to him to try get him linked with a BI, like linking with an AI.
The Overlord DLC from
That's
Mass Effect
that's
2.
it.
Yeah.
And that gets me every time. And then, but when you see him then in 3, depending on obviously what you do, where you send him, you'll see him in 3, and it's like, yes, I'm so glad I did that. And I'm so glad I've seen him, and he's got the happy ending. So there are so many moments like that.
That's another one where, like, if you haven't played that, I think I was aware of the DLCs after Mass Effect 2 came out, but I never played them when they were first coming out. I think if you get to 3, there's a point where that guy shows up and he's like, if you didn't do it, he's like, oh yeah, I was like a guy who made my brother an overlord and he died and everybody died and everything was bad because I didn't have a commander Shepard there to, to save the day. Very funny how many like these characters show up and they're like, oh yeah, I had a cool adventure that sucked because you weren't there. You still bought the DLC.
Because you didn't pay for the $10 pass. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think EA kind of screwed the pooch a little bit with some of these things. I understand that that's kind of where the industry was going because GameStop was kind of booming and the resale market was booming. And EA was like, well, we're not seeing any of that money and we want some of that money. But overall, the Mass Effect trilogy, I think, is very much like the video game version of Star Wars, where you have that first introduction that just gets a lot of people, then you have the second one that gets even more people, then the third one a lot of people are like it's okay, and then you have angry internet trolls that are like it's the worst fucking thing ever.
Yeah, and then the new ones come out and everyone complains about how woke it is.
Pretty much.
But yeah, I could talk about these games for hours, and I feel like, I always feel like I'm in the middle of a rant, and I'm like nobody else is talking because I'm just because I just have so many thoughts about it. So hopefully that's not the case in your perception. But anyway,
I can always edit it so it seems like you're not hogging all the
yeah.
airtime.
So yeah, like I literally am. But I mean, if you haven't played these games, if you have any like kind of thing that can run games, I think except for like a Switch, I think is the only thing it's not on. But they released it last year as like an anniversary package called the Legendary Edition. It's got all 3 games, all basically almost all the DLC, all the DLC that matters. I would say, if you have 120 hours and $60, you can have a good time.
Oh, it's on Game Pass actually. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's
that too.
yeah. You have an Xbox with Game Pass, go for it.
I think it's the original editions. I don't think the Legendary Edition is on there, but all 4 games are on there: 1, 2, 3, and Andromeda.
It's got no. It's definitely the Legendary Edition because that's one I'm playing now. I'm done doing it through Game Pass.
Oh,
Yeah. And they did a great job on the first game as well. Kind of bringing that up to kind of like the same level as the second two as well. So
yeah, there are some really great quality of life improvements. I'm still trying to make my way through the third one. I forgot how much of that one is just kind of like go to this part of the Citadel and then go to that part of the Citadel and then come back to this part of the Citadel to finish the mission. It's just so many of those like fetch quests that it becomes a little grating at times, but it's still a lot of fun. And I can't recommend the trilogy enough, as these guys are saying. If you haven't played it, strongly recommend it, especially if you have the time.
If you are playing the third one, I will give you just advice. Don't be me. If you're trying to get the best ending, do all those little side quests. They seem dumb and silly, but there's a couple of points where like they will take them away from you. And like I missed the best ending on my second playthrough by like the slightest of that little score, because I hit one of those points in a return and it was like, oh, by the way, the quest to get potatoes or whatever the hell, that's gone now. Sorry. And now that means your shepherd is high.
Also, fuck Udina, whatever that guy's title is.
Yeah.
He is the worst.
Sorry, Josh. I had one more thing I wanted to say. One line that stuck out in my mind from it, and it's from Rex, and it's from the first game. But I creased up when I heard this again. It was like he's in the middle of an argument, and he says, "Don't piss in my ear and tell me it's raining." I mean, that's a brilliant. That's kind of what I wanted to finish with. Brilliant. I love Rex.
If there's
our
a better
gigantic turtle man.
a better way to go out, I don't know what it is.
And with that, we will start winding down. You can follow me on Twitter at Josh_Scar. You can follow the podcast at Talking Smack Pod. You can email us at tsmackpod@gmail.com. Thank you to Leo Allen for our musical themes. Thank you to Beppo for our avatars. Please subscribe, rate, review. Dan, please feel free to share your socials.
Get us on Twitter at Casting Views, or if you want to send us an email, it's castingviewspod@gmail.com.
And definitely subscribe to Casting Views, because it is a fantastic podcast and it's a great way to start your Sundays.
Yes, thank you.
I will pitch.
And
real
with
quick.
that, Matt,
I'll pitch. Sorry, because I'm not going to share my socials because I am locked, because I don't want any of you knowing what I have to say. But we do have a Discord, Talking Smack. Josh.
Yes, I got to put the Discord into the script there.
Josh probably knows more about how to actually access it, but it's a fun time. We are on it. Some of the other various friends of the podcast are on it. And if you ever if you listen to this show and thought, I wish I could listen to that dude's rants, but in text form, that's Discord. Every day. I'm just whatever random thing is on my mind. So
yeah, the link to the Discord will be in the episode descriptions. That's going to be a standard thing now going forward, but I did add it to my script so I could stop forgetting about it, because pretty much right now it's just us and the Video Game Club guys, which Discord is a fun service that allows us to have different conversations going in different places, but we're always on subject because of that. So it is a really fun service. So thank you, Matt, for bringing that up. I forgot about that altogether.
It's the one thing that I sort of control. So.
And thank you, everyone, for taking the time to listen. Take care. And again, please subscribe, rate, review, and we will talk to you soon.
Play Mass Effect.
One final thing before I go. Watch Star Trek.